Good afternoon. Today is October 7th at 2:30 p.m. and my name is Alyssa Vargas. Today we are here with Fred Christian at Florida International University, Biscayne Bay campus. This interview is part of Miami's Wealth Gap Oral History Project created in collaboration with FIU and Catalyst Miami. Today we will specifically be speaking on the topic of homeownership. Can you tell us your name and where and when you were born?
My name is Fred Christian. I was born on March 20th, 1970 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I'm 52 years old.
And you mentioned being born in New Jersey. Can you tell us about your journey coming here to Miami?
Wow, that's interesting. I moved to a lot of cities. From the time I was 5, it was migrating between Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, and Atlantic City area. Then after 7 years old, I went to Coconut Creek Elementary School, North Lauderdale, Florida. 1981, I moved to Ocala, Florida so my parents could purchase a home outside Ocala, Florida. We lived there until 1993 when my parents divorced. Then I relocated to Glassboro, New Jersey for a temporary time to finish my college up at Rowan University. Then we relocated temporarily to Port St. Lucie, then to Hollandale Beach in 96, 95, 96. By 97 to 2012, we were in Ocala. And then from 2012 to 2018, we were in Miami Gardens, and then for a brief stint in St. Pete for about 9 months from 2018 to 2019, and 2019 to now I currently live in Miami Gardens, Florida.
Wow.
I've lived in a lot of places in the state, and I've seen a lot of things.
Of course. Just for clarification purposes, what age did you first come over here to Florida?
Between 3 and 4.
Can you describe the neighborhood you live in and what an ordinary day in your neighborhood looks like?
The neighborhood I live in is a senior community. I'm not going to name it for request of management.
Of course.
It is in Miami Gardens, Florida. It's approximately 330 apartment units, 2 stories, 23 buildings, and comprised of residents between the ages of 62 to 84. I live there because my father's 77 years old, or almost 76. He's 76, and I live there to help him because he's in a wheelchair and he has cerebral palsy, and I help him as best I can.
Of course.
In spite of my own disabilities.
Of course. And what would an ordinary day in that neighborhood look like?
It actually is pretty calm and pretty quiet. Believe it or not, Miami Gardens can be kind of a hot spot, like many Miami-Dade can, with the gun violence and different things that happen. But our community is pretty calm and orderly. Most people try to get along with each other. It's a pleasant apartment community. Go outside the gates. It's different. But you know what? I've lived in a lot of places and I'm happy here.
Can you describe the communities that you are a part of and what your relationship or connection with them is like?
Several. I've got a fondness for every place in South Florida because I've lived in so many places. I love South Florida. I lived in Ocala for a while, but unfortunately the political climate in Ocala got kind of more conservative than I would like, and that's why we relocated part of it, because it wasn't the most accommodating place for disabled persons. And I'm comfortable here. Even though there's a lot of bad stuff that happens with shootings and violent crime, which I'll get to in a little bit, and unfortunately the rent is very high, which I will get to in a little bit. You know, I'm comfortable here, and I'm happy here, and I've got a great group of people I work with who we'll talk about in a little bit.
Of course. You did mention having to move from Ocala because you didn't feel comfortable as a member of the disabled community. Can you go into that a little more if you're comfortable?
Yeah, it was just, I had disabilities for years that I didn't know I had. And I had no health care.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I didn't know I had problems. Imagine being diagnosed at age 42 with autism, and you didn't know you had a form of autism. I had learning disabilities, I had motor coordination problems, dyslexia, dyscalculia. I did not have dyslexia for a long time until I finally accepted it at age 42. But I worked my way through it, and I went to college. I went to Central Florida Community College in Ocala. Went to Lakewood High School in Ocala, Lakewood Middle School. And I worked my way through it. I was diagnosed at Coconut Creek Elementary in South Florida. So that's why I'm so grateful to this area, because a lot of things, good things happen for me in South Florida.
And just one last question, just for clarifications on this. You'd say you'd feel part of the disabled community, correct?
Yes.
Is there any other communities of the South Florida
African American community, you know, the Christian community, people of faith. I'm a people person. I like all people. I don't have to be a set niche. I advocate for disabled people because I am disabled. I want them to have, I don't want a child to go through like I went through because I can't drive a car. I was 22 years old and tried to drive a car, and I'm going to show you this. I don't track objects well. You can see my eyes don't move, okay? It's a fixed stare. It's a very rare condition, which I've explained to people about. And I've had trouble, people thought I was staring at them when I wasn't even probably consciously staring at them in the past, which is sad. I might be lost in thought because some of us with autism are lost in thought. Sometimes we get in our own worlds. I don't have full-blown autism. I have Asperger's, which is social cue related, but I mostly am learning disabled on a fairly high spectrum. Not perfect spectrum. I am on the spectrum, but I don't. That's why I identify as disabled. So disabled people have a voice. That's why I do what I do.
Describe an average day in your life as a disabled community member. Can you describe any obstacles you feel you may have come across?
Well, let's see. My life in the beginning, before when I was living in Ocala, wasn't the best in the world because I didn't have a real purpose because I couldn't work. Imagine being 30 years old and you can't drive and you can't get to most jobs. You can't handle money, which means you can't handle a register, which cuts out a lot of jobs. You don't have the manual dexterity to go work in the back of a McDonald's. My best bet, even with a college degree in communications, if I couldn't do radio, TV, or film or write, was going to probably be, I can say this without plug, public supermarkets, which I ended up working at for a couple months. It was a good experience. Unfortunately, the transportation, not driving, even though it was close and hours a day and needing to be home for family support, had me leave that job. But I was ended up with front service. And unfortunately, because I couldn't drive, I wasn't going to advance to anywhere management or anything, which means I wouldn't have made any money to survive, which I'm going to get to in a little bit with the housing problem. You need to make a certain amount of money here to survive. And it's all the way in Florida that you need that. And a lot of disabled people are struggling with it. A lot of us get between $500 and $800 a month. Who can afford rent on that? Who can afford food on that? And who can afford medicine on that? Thanks.
So I know you pretty much touched on this right now, but are there any specific barriers that you see every single day as a member of the disabled community?
Transportation. Transportation. If you can't drive and you have to pay for it, or STS, sometimes you'll wait forever for it. It's not their fault, but it's shared ride. It's affordable, but it's shared ride. Buses are I like buses. I've ridden buses. I have no problem with it, but you don't want to be carrying a load of food, sitting out in 95-degree heat, waiting 25 minutes for a bus when you have ice cream and milk and that kind of stuff. You don't. You don't want to be sitting, I have asthma and high blood pressure and diabetes. You don't want to be sitting out in the rain or heat with that too. You'll fall out. So I mean, the bus system works good as it can for Miami-Dade for the average person. It's a great, MDT, VCT are great. I will use them, I support them, as do special transportation services and TOPS. But Lyft Uber needs to come more into focus for people that need individualized things like going to the grocery store, going to events, etc., like they're doing with doctors. And insurances need to pick up the tab for that too, because I have a private service I use called Team Family, Papa Family, and it costs an arm and a leg sometimes just to go to the store and get help and rides to the store. I mean, you have to ask your friends for rides, you have to ask family for rides. It's not an easy thing with transportation being disabled. And the people in chairs have it worse because they have to have a specialized vehicle to get them there.
Right. Perfect, thank you. Do you consider yourself an activist for any communities in Miami? And which communities would that be?
I advocate for people. I'm going to tell what I advocate for. I advocate for health. I advocate for people for health care. I went from the age of 16, and I'll tell the story real quickly. I was 16 in Ocala, living outside Ocala, Florida, and there wasn't a paid fire department back then. There was one ambulance in the area we lived in because it was kind of rural. My dad had to drive me to the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning because I had a massive asthma attack at 16. 2 weeks later, we went to a specialist. I was denied insurance. My dad was begging the hospital the second week I had to go to the hospital to treat me. 16 years old. There was no hospital charity back then. There was no Baker-Carey Act back then, which covered a lot of people in basic emergency care. So that was the thing, wake-up call. I always wanted health care because I was told my dad had coverage for me. They wouldn't pay it because they said I had asthma, which I didn't have. I developed it. So I went from age 16 to the age of 50 when I got my disability without health care. 34 years without health care, folks. 34 years. I have a close friend named Mariami Amy who went a long time without a tube. Her daughter Genesis had one lung missing. They have health care now, but we had to fight for them to get it. And a few other friends I knew that I've done artwork for on my page that went without health care, and they shouldn't have gone without health care. Some of them had severe conditions, and they should not have ever gone without health care. Nobody should. I'm still working on it to this day, and hopefully we're going to get it on a petition on the ballot, or something good will come out of this where we can get the legislature to expand Medicaid, because how it works is Medicaid covers anyone below $12,500, which is poverty level. Above that, you will qualify for an ACA subsidy. Many people do not qualify for an ACA subsidy because they make too little money. And they will take out of pocket because they make too much, having to pay for rent and stuff like that, which we will get to.
Right.
Second part, I advocate for rental assistance, which I'll show the picture and the finished product. I lived in apartments most of my life. I wanted to be a homeowner one day and hope to be, but I can't be. So, make a long story short, rent's not cheap. I was talking to Anna Ruth that took me in today about it. And we pay under market rent because we're seniors and it's a state program. But the average rent in Miami-Dade, I was bringing this out for you guys today. Be prepared when you graduate to pay $2,000 to $2,500 for your rent. Now, if you're going to have children, a boyfriend or wife, or however you guys choose to live, you're looking at a 2-bedroom to a 4-bedroom, you're looking at $2,500 to $5,000 house or apartment, depending upon what you want to do. Now, you can get cheaper, because I visited Liberty City as an advocate on gun violence. I visited on Overtown a couple months ago. Went to Overtown. I've been through Overtown for medical issues, going to Bascom Palmer for my eyes and different things like that, because I did get my eyes looked at to get my disability. Mm-hmm. That was part of it. But went to Overtown for the first time, and the buildings were built between 1940 and 1960. Okay? These were 2 to 3 story buildings, no frills, not like a traditional complex like I live in with them. Some complexes have laundry facilities in the hallways, in the buildings, in the actual apartments, or they have a centralized laundry facility. You had no laundry facilities in these buildings. And I looked at these buildings, seeing all the stuff that had happened on Surfside, seeing what happened with all the other buildings that have been evacuated, and I said to myself, okay, these aren't real tall buildings, but looking at them, I said, these are old buildings. They probably got mold in them. They probably got electrical issues, plumbing issues, and these people were paying $600 a month to live in this. And then you walk out your door and you potentially can get shot. That's not worth it. Plus, you got urban filth in these neighborhoods. You got needles on the ground. You got trash in the buildings, roaches. You kids do not deserve to live like that. You don't. You need better. You're going to school. Better yourselves. Even the working kids that are going to go to the McDonald's and the Burger Kings and the service route, or the public service route, police, fire, EMS, they deserve better. Nobody should be living in filth. Nobody should be living in crime. When you have your children, they should be allowed to play outside, which I'll get to in the gun violence now. Okay, 2013, I did a lot of online advocating for gun violence, mostly Facebook, Twitter. Not a lot, but I did some. But by 2018, when Parkland happened, because it was so close to home, living in North Lauderdale and Coconut Creek, it hit me. 3 days I was devastated, and I'm a communications major, and I write here and there, do the memes, etc. But I wouldn't really write. I wrote blogs, but not, for a long time I didn't write. So basically, I ended up writing this poem, which I'm going to read to you guys at the end, called How Many, because I was devastated. So I decided at that day and forward, I'm going to go forward, I'm going to do more for gun violence and make sure, because I was sick of it. Seeing the Chastity Saunders get killed. She was a 7-year-old who exited her house at a birthday party after Parkland. King Carter, little 5-year-old in his football uniform, died going out for a walk to the store. And you had Jada Page get killed under the age of 10. You had Elijah LaFrance at 4 years old at his birthday party. Then you had the older kids, whom I advocate for their moms. My friend Lisa's son, Jack Brown. My friend Tracy's son, Louis Leon Jr. My friend Tracy's son, Marlon Goodluck. And my friends, Tawana, who lost 5 of her own relatives, plus several others. Sharita with Zamari. Omarosa with Mendel. They lost these children to gun violence. And these kids, it was so bad. One time before I relocated to St. Pete, a relative had an argument over a food stamp card. He was going to shoot his niece, shot his little 5-year-old niece, grandniece instead, and killed her. Yep. That's how bad this is. We had Mrs. Elizabeth Level 3 weeks ago, sitting in front of her home, 85 years old in Liberty City, minding her own business, victim of a drive-by. 85 years old. That's what I'm saying. So we need better communities for you guys. That's what I advocate for. And I advocate for affordable rent too.
How did your activism journey begin, and what roles did you partake in?
About 2010, I was living in Ocala, and as I stated, I had no health care. And basically, we had to call the fire department for me and my dad because we got sick a few times. And the fire department always came out with paramedics. And one brain surgeon city manager who's no longer there decided they were going to take 2 of the trucks out of service, which would have affected response times for everybody medically. I said, oh no, I'm not having this. So I wrote a letter to the editor of the Ocala Star-Banner, and it got published, and I wrote 4 or 5 other letters on different social issues, not anything like Black Lives Matter, but basically poverty issues, affordability of rent, keeping the hospital solvent, that kind of thing. And it went over okay. I was pleased and blessed to get it. but I didn't really consider myself an activist until 2013 when I was in church one day, and I always been a person of faith, and because I had no health care, I promised God, I said, God, if I ever get this close, and we did get the ACA with Obamacare, as you guys know, passed, but Florida didn't expand Medicaid, so I started a petition to try to get Governor Scott and the legislature to expand Medicaid. Unfortunately, the petition didn't work, but I'm still here today activism as a full-time activist without pay, just doing it out of love for community, and that's what I do.
So what role specifically do you take on today in your activism?
Day to day, it depends on what happens, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. Maybe gun violence some days, maybe healthcare. Depends, maybe housing. Depends on the field, what's going on, what needs to be said. I approach it from a journalistic perspective and a communications perspective. I approach it as telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
From your experiences and observations, can you describe the housing situation in Miami right now?
It's ridiculous. Who can afford this? Like by me, what you're going to put in the finished product says, who can afford this? Who can? You can't afford this. I was talking to the young lady that brought me in today. You're going to have to make $75,000. What are you kids going to do? What are you kids going to do? Really, I mean, I feel for you. I was 25 years old. I had $15,000 in debt from borrowed. You guys are going to have more than that. Thank God Biden bailed you out, but still, you're going to have student loans to pay. You're going to have, what kind, I care about young people. A lot of you guys don't know I exist and impact yet, but I do care. I want you guys to have a better world, and that's why I do what I do. But back to the housing. The rents have got to be cheaper. I'm not saying give it away, but you cannot have a divide like I saw in Overtown, where you have the rail, the metro rail, okay? And on one side it's ultra poor, ultra old, ultra run down with 40s to 50s and 60s level housing buildings. And then you see these giant skyscrapers that nobody can afford to live in. I mean, come on. I'm not saying we all need to live in the high rises, but let's meet in the middle, please.
Can you tell us more about what is affecting availability and the quality of housing in Miami at the moment?
Okay, they fail to factor in their people that work for a living. Very simple. They fail to factor in that the teachers, the policemen, the firemen, the cooks, the servers, the maids in the hotels, the fast food worker, the grocery store employee, the Walmart employee, the retail employee. They're not going to, unless their management make enough money. They're going to work 2 jobs, sometimes or 3 jobs, just to break even. Because you have to understand, now they're going to pay probably a $400 or $500 car payment if they have a car. Plus, they're going to have to pay maybe a $300 car insurance payment. So and then they're going to do without health care, medicine, etc. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul, literally. Paul, literally.
Right. And what are some of those specific barriers that you're seeing to home ownership nowadays? Is it even accessible to become a homeowner?
Honest to God, the state and the federal government are going to have to step in. They're going to have to do something with rent control. They're going to have to do something with mortgages and something. They're going to have to do something with the health care. I mean, personally, I think the first responders, given the pandemic, and nurses should get free health care. That's my opinion. I really think they should get it free. Policemen, firemen, they're putting their life at risk for us. They should get it free, and their medicine, and they should get it for their lifetime to incentivize them. And teachers too. I was listening to my friend Tawana, and she's a principal, and she was saying how a lot of people, she's an assistant principal, but she was a teacher for over 20 years. And she was saying how $50,000 is just not going to cut it to live in Dade anymore. And that's what the problem is. If you don't make about $75,000, you can't buy anything. And then if everything's costing $700, okay, for instance, and back in my community, they built brand new townhomes, $440,000. Who's going to pay $440,000? And number one, you don't really have a yard. You have a backyard, perhaps possibly big as this here. Okay, that might be your backyard, but you don't have enough to work with. You are next to another building. It's all attached with a garage. You're living in a box. You may as well rent if you're going to live in a box.
When you hear the words generational wealth and wealth gap, what do you think of?
A bunch of rich people that just could care less about most working people that are in their own bubble, that just don't get it, to be blunt. That just don't get it. I'm not going to bash the Bill Gateses of the world. I'm not going to bash the Warren Buffetts of the world, because they see the reality. But there are several, like, I'm not going to really get political, but like our former president and certain associates, certain people in big business that just don't understand what it's like to be a working person. They made it. They built something sometimes from scratch, some of them. And then, you know, you got Jeff Bezos. He built Amazon from nothing. And now he's a billionaire. The man spent $50 million on a boat. Do you know how many people could get fed for $50 million? How many people could have got medicine for $50 million? I'll give an example of the hurricane right now. Those people on the West Coast need water. How much water $50 million could have bought? You know, I mean, it's priorities, period.
Right. And I'm just gonna, for a quick pause, I'm just gonna add in number 11 as a quick follow-up.
How does affordable housing affect different communities?
There isn't any. We need rent control desperately. Desperately need rent control. Desperately need a voucher system. We desperately need the Section 8 program to be expanded. Desperately. Not for everybody, but we need something for working families to survive.
Of course.
We need a plan in place. It might be price, I mean, even food's going up. I mean, food is ridiculous. It is. The price of food is, I mean, I don't know how you kids eat. I mean, really, honestly, my dad and I are shaking our heads. You know, it's like, and I'm diabetic on top of it now. I've been diabetic for 2 years because I made some bad food choices for a couple years. And it's no fun being diabetic either.
Right.
I don't have to do insulin, which is another story, but the price of insulin, too.
Absolutely. And that is a
How does the wealth gap in Miami affect the disabled community?
We deserve better. I'm going to be honest, we deserve better. I mean, I applied for disability in 2013. Should have automatically got Medicaid, at least to get me through. Shouldn't have had to haggle for it. I mean, come on. I had an issue with my eyes I didn't even know I had. I mean, you know, I had issues I didn't even know I had. Had I had health care, I would have been better off. My life would have been, I had a better quality of life. That's why I do this, so everybody can have a better quality of life.
Absolutely. And how do you feel the wealth gap specifically affects the disabled community in terms of safety? I know that's a big portion of your advocacy work.
Not good. To be honest with you, not good. You're in a chair, like a motorized chair, a marked cart, or a wheelchair. You literally are a sitting duck. You go to a grocery store, you go to a theater, you go to a church, mosque, synagogue. You go to fortunately the arenas and stadiums are safe. But you go to a park, even go to a high school football or basketball game, you're still at risk. Sad to say, Little League games, sometimes you can be at risk. Because someone gets mad at someone over something stupid and they want to shoot. You're a sitting duck. You're a sitting duck. I hate to say it like that, but I'm going to be blunt. You're a sitting duck. And you shouldn't, you know, and a lot of disabled people don't, some autistic people are on the spectrum. They don't understand how to get out of the way. Mm-hmm. They don't understand. It's like they're teaching you guys, you're probably the first generation they did active shooter drills for. I'm 52 and I never had an active shooter drill. You want to know what the two worst things I had happen to me in high school were? We had a phony bomb threat called in, and we had a heater fire in our school. That's the two times we ever had to leave our school and go outside, ever. I started high school in 84, graduated in 88. That's the two worst things that ever happened in incident-wise for high school. Now, every day, it's like a friend of mine, Susan, who made this bracelet. Her son's in high school. She was panicking one day because she got a text from him that the school had a gun incident. Thank God nothing happened, but still it's the principle that our kids are at risk. Disabled children, especially with their sensory motor problems too. They're not going to get out of the way quick enough.
It's wonderful that you bring this up because how do you feel this affects disabled community members in the classroom and in the education?
Okay, we need to do better for them in terms of, I have a friend, like I said, who's an assistant principal who you guys are going to get to meet in a couple weeks. She's a wonderful lady. We need more people like Tawana Akins that are educators that have the mindset to teach the children right. We need more people like them that are going to have a mindset how to teach the special needs children and reach them. Because that's part of the problem now. Some of these children doing these acts are special needs children. Some of them have undetected mental health issues, which is another thing with the healthcare. If we pass the Medicaid expansion, we can have mental health provisions to get people out of crisis mode before a tragedy happens with a gun. So, you know, the disabled community, like I said, we need better housing, affordable housing. We need more income too, because you can't live on $500 to $700 to $1,000 to $1,200 a month. You cannot do it most places.
Of course.
So, hope I answered that good enough to you.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Based on your experience, do you believe homeownership is a human right or more of a luxury and investment?
it is a human right. It is. Having a place to live, period, renting or owning is a human right. All people deserve dignity. Nobody should be sleeping under an overpass on an interstate. Nobody should be on a corner curled up. Nobody should be on a bus bench curled up. Nobody should be packed into a shelter. We've got to do better. I mean, you have people sometimes living in rundown motels like in Orlando. There were years ago, there were Days Inns and Holiday Inns. They've made them into subpar hotels. Because let me explain you something. My family in Atlantic City, before I was born, ran what they call rooming houses, hotel rooming houses, okay? They were not your modern Hampton Inn or your Holiday Inn or your Marriott's, okay? Basically, you had a room. It was basically like the Blues Brothers. If you've seen the movie The Blues Brothers, when Jake and Elwood went in a room, some of them were bigger. You had a sink, maybe you had a hot plate, you had a bed, or a bed or two, depending upon how much you could afford. You had a bathroom down the hall, and you shared a bathroom sometimes. If you were privileged enough, you had a bathroom in your own room. We got away from that because of sanitary and health reasons and building codes, etc., to where people have their own bathroom. But at least with rooming houses, people had a space to stay. We might need to revisit that in terms of not a rooming house per se, but finding a way for people to have a place to stay with their own bathroom, with their own space, and their own bed at least.
So, just for absolute clarification of our side of filming, yes or no, based on your experience as a disabled community member, would you say that homeownership is a human right instead of a luxury or an investment?
Yes, it's a human right. Having a place to live, period. Owning it or renting it is a human right. All people deserve dignity. I don't do this. I do this so people have dignity.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you.
Is there anything else you would like to add or say?
I'm going to close it with this poem so you guys can read it. I didn't practice it, but I'm going to read it to you anyway.
Go for it.
This is called How Many. This is the poem I told you about after Parkland. How many? How many tears must we cry? How many times must we say goodbye when someone we love dies? How many times must we sigh and want to cry? How many kids must die? How many moms and dads will cry? How many Americans will cry, why, when someone they love dies? Too many tears, too many fears, too few years. How many more will say enough? How many more will rise up and say enough? Before our future dies, before it begins, how many will cry?
That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay, guys, I want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity.